Commandment of a legacy of love. I love that passage. We're moving into the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel 1:3. The story of Hannah. Many of you might remember this story. I'm going to start at the very beginning. This is the story of Elkanah, a man of the tribe of Ephraim who lived in Ramathaim, Zophim, in the hills of Ephraim. His father's name was Jeroham. His grandfather was Elihu. His great-grandfather was Zehu. And his great-great-grandfather was Zuph. He had 2 wives, Hannah and Peninnah. Peninnah had some children, but Hannah didn't. Each year, Elkanah and his families journeyed to the tabernacle at Shiloh to worship the Lord of the heavens and to sacrifice to him. The priests on duty at that time were the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas. On the day he presented his sacrifice, Elkanah would celebrate the happy occasion by giving presents to Peninnah and her children. But although he loved Hannah very much, he could only give her 1 present, for the Lord had sealed her womb, and she had no children to give presents to. Peninnah made matters worse by taunting Hannah because of her barrenness. Every year it was the same. Peninnah scoffing and laughing at her as they went to Shiloh, making her cry so much she couldn't eat. "What's the matter, Hannah?" Elkanah was exclaimed. "Why aren't you eating? Why make such a fuss over having no children? Isn't having me better than having 10 sons? One evening after supper, when they were at Shiloh, Hannah went over to the tabernacle, and Eli the priest was sitting in his customary place beside the entrance. She was in deep anguish, and she was crying bitterly as she prayed to the Lord. And she made this vow: "O Lord of heaven, if you will look down upon my sorrow and answer my prayer and give me a son, then I will give him back to you, and he will be yours for his entire lifetime, and his hair shall never be cut." Eli noticed her mouth moving as she was praying silently, and hearing no sound, he thought she was drinking. "Must you come in here drunk?" he demanded. "Throw away your bottle." Oh, no, sir," she replied. "I'm not drunk, but I'm very sad, and I was pouring out my heart to the Lord. Please don't think I'm just some drunken bum." "In that case," Eli said, "cheer up. May the Lord of Israel grant you your petition, whatever it is." "Oh, thank you, sir," she exclaimed, and went happily back and began to take her meals again. The entire family was up early the next morning and went to the tabernacle to worship the Lord once more. Then they returned home to Ramah, and when Elkanah slept with Hannah, the Lord remembered her petition. In the process of time, a baby boy was born to her, and she named him Samuel, meaning asked of God, because, as she said, "I asked the Lord for him." The next year, Elkanah and Peninnah and her children went on the annual trip to the tabernacle without Hannah, for she told her husband, "Wait until the baby is weaned, and then I will take him to the tabernacle and leave him there." "Well, whatever you think is best," Elkanah agreed. "May the Lord's will be done." So she stayed home until the baby was weaned, and even though he was still so small, they took him to the tabernacle in Shiloh, along with a 3-year-old bull for the sacrifice, and a bushel of flour and some wine. After the sacrifice, they took the child to the priest Eli. "Sir, do you remember me?" Hannah asked him. "I am the woman who stood here that time praying to the Lord. I asked him to give me this child, and he has given me my request. And now I am giving him to the Lord for as long as he lives." So she left him there at the tabernacle for the Lord to use. The word of the Lord. Now, the scripture today tells us about a man named Elkanah, who, as you heard, comes from a distinguished line of ancestors whose names are very tricky to pronounce. Now, we know that Elkanah is wealthy because when he offers sacrifices, he gives presents to his wives and children. He even gives one to Hannah, even though she's barren. Hannah's situation is pretty dire. If she doesn't produce a son, she remains barren and something happens to her husband, she'll have no recourse and could be cast out in the streets. As a woman in this time period, she really has no rights. And she's surrounded by a patriarchal system that doesn't understand her vulnerability, even in the temple, or understand her need. And to that point, her husband asks her, What's the matter, Hannah? Why aren't you eating? Why make such a fuss over having no children? Isn't having me better than having 10 sons? He seems a little bit clueless about fertility and infertility and about Hannah's heart. In response, Hannah fasts and pours out her soul before God while her husband and the others eat and drink wine after sacrificing to God. That's customary. But Hannah sets herself apart by abstaining from the wine, so her presentation of herself to God will be pleasing when she goes to God to the temple to pray to him. So it's even more ironic when she abstains from alcohol on purpose that Eli the priest approaches her thinking she's drunk. Another dichotomy is that Hannah believed that God had closed her womb. Did you hear that in there? Yet in her desperation, she turns back to God, the only one she believes will help her. So Hannah turns to God and makes a vow. Now, vows are really, really important in the Old Testament. They indicate the importance of God to the person making the vow, and they indicate to us the very great significance of personal sacrifice and commitment in the service of God. That's something, very frankly, that's been lost in today's world. The idea of sort of making a binding commitment to God is somewhat alien to us in today's culture. But Hannah prays for God to see her, and she prays for God to remember her, as Israel might pray for God to remember the covenant. She prays like Samson's mother, that if she has a child, she'll dedicate the boy as a Nazirite. Did you hear me say she will not cut his hair? So what is a Nazirite? A Nazirite lives at the temple and devotes themselves to God. Now, Nazirites have vows they live by. They would abstain from wine and all grape products, refrain from cutting their hair, not become ritually impure by touching a corpse or going to a funeral. They have to offer a specific sacrifice after the vow period, and then they must shore and then burn their hair after the vow period. It's very specific. The Nazirite is a picture of someone who is kingdom-minded, someone who's concerned for the things that concern God, someone who is concerned enough to advance God's kingdom. The Nazirite is a picture of someone who's consecrated to God, devoted to God, handed over in service to God. And a Nazirite is a God-treasuring person, someone who loves God above everyone and everything else. And these are actually the qualities of discipleship that we see spelled out in the New Testament. So when Hannah vows to commit her son, she aligns her future child's identity with her own. Her legacy of caring and commitment to God lives on in her son. Hannah was an amazing disciple of God. Amazing. And now I'd like to read you a story about a young man in Korea who had a really unique family life and who made a legacy. I like this story a lot. Ching Hyu's father served as a physician in the ER and was never home. His mother was a foreign diplomat and lived away from home for a year at a time. The family was quite wealthy, but could not give the child what it really needed, a mother and father who were right there for him, a family just to eat dinner with. Now, there was a family who lived in the same block who were quite poor. The father owned a snack shop, and mother stayed home and took care of their 2 children. They had family dinners together, and the parents all went to the school programs. They were a close-knit family, although poor. Ching Hyu was in their daughter's class, so naturally this next-door stay-at-home mom started to take care of the boy. When he was sick, she tended to him. When he needed an ear to listen, she was there. The poor mother taught him about kindness and generosity and how to be a family and how to take care of each other. She also taught him to respect his elders, which was a very important value in Korean society. As Ching Hyu grew, he remembered the lessons that his neighbor family had taught him. He became quite educated, and when he graduated, he opened his own architecture firm. Now, because of his family name, a lot of clients came to him seeking his services. But he found himself rejecting many of their proposals because they lacked the values that he learned. So his firm wasn't very lucrative, and they had a difficult time making ends meet. But he felt strongly about his principles. One day, as he was walking home from his firm, he met an elderly woman on the street as she was trying to push a cart filled with cardboard. Apparently, she walked around town from dawn until dusk, collecting cardboard scraps from the dumpsters outside of businesses and restaurants, so she could sell the scraps every day to the recycle company. This was how she survived. But today, her cart had a broken wheel, and the young man approached her. "Grandmother, your cart is broken. Let me mend it for you and then push your cart where you need to go." He fixed the cart and pushed the cart up several steep hills to get to the recycle center, several steep hills, and then he walked her home. She lived in Shantytown, on the outskirts of the city, and she had a cooking fire outside with no protective cover, and a sleeping area the size of a bedroom closet inside. She had mats on the concrete floor where she slept. This saddened him a great deal. After careful thought, he invested in the materials and decided to have her shanty be the first of many that he would make livable for the elderly. He gathered his friends together. They transformed this shanty into livable, tiny housing. His lessons of family honor, unity, and caring for those who were struggling were ingrained in him from his neighbors. He had become part of their family, and therefore he saw this act of kindness as leaving a legacy in honor of his adopted family. He didn't make any money on the project. In fact, he had to buy all the supplies and do the labor himself with his friends. But it was worth it to see the old woman's face when she came in the door and saw that she had a counter to cook on inside, away from the cold and rain, and a cot to sleep on that was off the cold concrete ground. His story was picked up by a local reporter, and other interested people came out to make a difference. The government took notice, and the shanty town was turned into affordable tiny housing. The legacy of caring would continue into the future because of one man's dedication and commitment to following his heart, his values. Isn't that a wonderful story? Today, friends, is Legacy Sunday. We're unveiling a new program here at Big Cove for the first time in the history of the church, the opportunity to leave a legacy through an endowment, either before or after death, so that future generations of the church will still be serving the community long after we're gone. Kathy, would you come up here for a minute? Come share with me. That's fine. Can you all hear Kathy?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. So your husband, Don, and Sandra Stevens were instrumental in visualizing this program and starting in 2022.
True.
And Sandra and your husband died about a month from each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so here we are, committed to seeing their dream come true. I mean, we really are, right? How has this program affected you?
Well, Don really totally believed in the church, and everybody knows he participated quite a lot wherever he could. And he was very interested in doing the research on different endowment programs in other churches. And so he and Sandra put together a lot of information, and they handed it off to the session. And here we are today.
Here we are today. How do you think Don would have felt today?
I think he would. I think he'd be really glad.
I think so too.
I really do.
Really touched.
I think he would be so glad.
I think so too. And Sandra had a different, Dawn worked on a legacy program from the aspect of leaving something in your will.
Right.
And then Sandra worked on the part of the legacy program where it was leaving something before you die so that we could invest it now. Mm-hmm. And she worked on that part of the program.
Yes.
So it's kind of interesting. They balance each other.
They're both ways to preserve what we have here. And I think everybody would agree. We've talked so many times about what we have here, our love and our fellowship, and it's kind of a special thing. If you visit other churches, sometimes you see what we have here, and it's worth preserving, and that's why I'm here talking today.
So how have you made action on your commitment?
Well, it was very simple for me. I called my attorney, and I said, we're establishing an endowment program at our church, and I want to add something to my will. And so it took about 15 minutes to add an addendum to my will. And so now I have a bequest that comes to the church after I pass in honor of me and in Don. And I think it's a pretty challenging time for small churches right now. And I think we have to kind of look look to ourselves to perpetuate what we have here. I think it's going to be important to preserve what we have here and for ourselves and for our community. And I think we can weather these times. You know, the church has gone through lots of different changes over the years, and I have a lot of faith.
Yes, and leaving a legacy is just so important, I think, for the future generations, and it's a commitment also to the community. Say, we're going to be here for this community for a long time. So Ralph and I actually came off your commitment, and we too put that in our will. We hadn't given any memorial gifts to all the saints that had passed, so we also started a fund to start the legacy program. So we've seeded it. So between us, we've started this, and I'm so excited, and I really feel special that Don also feels like he's here with us today, and Sandra, and it's just been a really special time for us.
I just wanted to say one other thing is that I was thinking about is we talked, when we were first discussing this program in the session, there was a lot of talk about it, and then I thought, you know, I don't want to just talk about it anymore. I'd like to act on it. And for me, that was really an important step to go ahead and do that. So
Thank you for leaving a legacy.
thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. So friends, I really do believe that leaving a legacy is important. And just like Hannah, like Kathy, like the man from Korea who changed the lives of so many older people in the shanty town, God asks us to not just think about today, but use the lessons of yesterday to project us into tomorrow. And as we move into our future here at Big Cove, we need to praise the one who brought us all here. We read a part of Hannah's prayer for you. Hannah's prayer. My heart rejoices in the Lord. The Lord has made me strong. And now I have an answer for my enemies. I rejoice because you rescued me. No one is holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. Amen.